All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're about to start. Just so you know, this is being broadcast via Facebook Live, and we're recording this as well for TV. And if you could, as I reminded you, please make sure your cell phones are silenced. So we are joined today by Representative Billy Richardson, Mayor Mitch Colvin, and a host of others from the city and the county here, and they would like to make a statement on the North Carolina Civil War History and Reconstruction Center.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Arada. Thank you, each of you who've joined us today. First of all, let me acknowledge my other elected colleagues behind me from the Fayetteville City Council. We have council members Davis, Kinston, Ingram, Councilmember Hare, and Councilmember Larry Wright. We thank them for joining us today. We're also joined by several members of our county commission, the chairman, County Commissioner Faircloth, as well as County Commissioner Evans and County Commissioner Boose. Thank you for joining us today. The purpose of the meeting today of this press conference is to follow up and to clarify some of the positions that have been made in the op-ed on yesterday. Certainly I would like to take my hats off to Representative Billy Richardson for his leadership and for taking a stance on the importance of unifying our community as we talk about this very important and critical project to our community. You know, as we celebrate the 400th year of slavery in our nation, we realize that the impacts, both economic and socially, are still being felt in our communities today. Fayetteville, I am blessed to represent one of the most diverse cities in the state, if not the nation. And that diversity is a great strength that's represented throughout various aspects of our community. And as we talk about the Civil War History Center and the concept and this project, I think it is commendable of Representative Richardson to come out with some recommendations as to how we can bring a project of this magnitude into our community without dividing our community. We both, I think every elected official here today, we always want what's in the best interest of our community. And I think that the great first step in this matter is to make sure that we have a project that is accepted and is inclusive of all facets of our community. There were three major things that concerns that I have heard from the members of this community, which prompted me several months ago to take a stand and to ask our members of the foundation board of the Civil War History Center to pause for just a moment and to have a community discussion. As you know, we had a public hearing where we allowed the public for 3 hours to come in and to voice their opinions. I've had several conversations throughout the community with many members of different facets of our community who have voiced both pro and cons of this project. And so that tells us that we have a lot of work to be done. But the three main areas of interest or concern that I've heard from my constituents, one is that this will not be a holding ground for monuments and statues, Confederate monuments and statues. And so I think Representative Richardson had proposed the introduction of a local bill. I'll let him speak a little more to the specifics of how that would work to ensure the public and the citizens of Cumberland County and Fayetteville that this will not be a holding ground for Confederate monuments and statues if this project moves forward. Secondly, the community wanted to be included in the discussions of how this center would operate into the programming. And so, again, Representative Richardson had suggested that there be a community task force that consisted of board members as well as other citizens of our community who worked in concert, who visited other examples of these projects in other communities who have gotten this right. We know that there are successful examples of how communities, diverse communities, how this is a major asset in places like Montgomery, Alabama with the Peace and Justice Center, in Washington, D.C. With the African American Civil Rights Museum, and in Richmond, Virginia, who has an American Civil War Museum. And so the details of how that works, we will not have that today. But I think today is just a reiteration of our commitment to make sure that the concerns of the community are heard and represented in this project. And lastly, the community has voiced concern as to make sure there's economic inclusion by all. And so these are some of the areas that as this task force, as this citizen group is formed, I will speak to members of the Fayetteville City Council. We will have some input and dialogue as to which members of the community are selected, and I look forward to moving this project along. But today, we just wanted to lay the framework for this this desire by both now most of the delegation, and I'll let him speak to that, as well as the local government, to make sure that this is a project that is favorable for our community. And with that, I'll give way to Representative Richardson. But before I do that, I want to share with you a story that came up in this discussion. There are members of the community that want to make sure that all sides of the story are told and represented, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's a story about a gentleman who was killed in this community named Archie Beebe on February the 11th of 1867. Mr. Beebe was a businessman in this community, and this is 2 years after slavery. He was accused of some crime that he had not had his just due process, but in the process of being arraigned or arrested, Mr. Beebe was shot dead at the steps of the market house. But these are the kinds of stories that we understand are real stories, and that they need to be told in whatever project that comes forth out of this process. So it is my hope that this foundation, this board, will be acceptable to the suggestions of the members of this community and of the local governing partners who will serve as financial partners for this project. But with that, I'll give way to Representative Billy Richardson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, let me restate that. It's important that I be here, and it's important that we as elected officials hear what the community is saying. And I've heard, I've been to a lot of these meetings and give Mayor Coven credit for this. To really lead, to be a true mayor of a city as diverse as this is, takes amazing wisdom, and it takes guts. And for Mayor Coven to basically say to all of us, whoa, we're going to pause. We're going to get this right. It takes a visionary leader that we haven't had in a while. And I salute him for that. And I went to those meetings, and I listened, and I heard what folk were saying. And it touched me. And I believe that Mayor Coven's exactly right. That we have not heretofore had full participation by all segments of our community. And by not doing that, we're the lesser for it. The beauty of being a human, and the beauty in my faith, is that you can make mistakes and acknowledge that, and then learn from them and grow from them. And I think right now, at this point, we've made a mistake in not being fully inclusive in this process. But the beauty of that is we can acknowledge that, and we can follow our leader and correct that. And that's what we're trying to do here. And I think because of that, I'm an optimist by nature. I fully believe that we are going to get this done. We're going to get it done right, and we're going to fix this, and we're going to move forward. Because the opportunity here is twofold. One is, it is important that stories like the mayor just told be told, so that we can acknowledge them, accept that really happened, learn from it, and go forward and vow never to let it happen again. That is crucial if we're ever going to be a whole people, if we're ever going to come together. It is crucial that we do that. Secondly, I want my community to have full economic growth. And the way you do that is you envision big things and great things. And this center could be a big place for great economic growth for everyone in this community. But one without the other is not a blessing. We have to have both. And that's why I think what the mayor did was so good. And over the weeks, I've been sitting down with him and some other people that are close to the mayor, and I've been saying, what is it going to take to get us off center? And those three things kept repeating themselves. The worry about the relics, the worry about inclusion in the process itself, and saying, well, let's look at what other communities did and let's get it right. And I'm hoping that the mayor will appoint 4 cynics, 4 who are against the project. And I want those 4 to go to get with the board, because I think the board has some wonderful people on it. And I want those folks to go together and let's let magic happen. Because when people of goodwill, now notice I didn't say against it or firmly against it, I said cynics. Because people of goodwill talking to one another, great things can happen. And when this committee travels to these 3 places, 2 things are going to happen. One, we are going to learn about how communities got it right. And we're going to learn how they got it wrong. Because I tell my son all the time in the practice of law, learn from my mistakes. He's a great attorney, but learn from my mistakes and don't repeat them. And so what we can do is in learning from these communities, we can learn from their mistakes as well as from their victories. And that will be so embracing and enriching. But in addition to that, when you travel together, when you talk together, when you join in a mission together, magic happens. We actually do something with each other and not in spite of each other. And I believe that magic will cause 2 things to happen. I think it will build trust, and I think also it will build a collaborative effort that's going to make a wonderful thing even better. I've seen it throughout my life, and I know it can happen that way. It takes courage, and fortunately we had a mayor that has that courage to step out there. Because let me tell you, folks, he's probably getting it for both ends right now, because I know I sure am. But I admire him so much for doing this that I felt like I needed to have his back on it. Lastly, it's not going to be a true center if the advisory board does not truly reflect the diversity of this community. And I really believe that in my heart. And I know that if we don't do that, it will not be all it can be. So I'm hoping that when we start this process and do these 3 things, that it will be the beginning of something we all can embrace. The most important thing we can do in this process, because this center has pointed out something I've known instinctively in my heart for the last 20 years. Let's be real here. The 6,000-pound elephant in the living room in this community and others is we never talk about our mistrust of each other. We never talk about race. We dance around it. We get in our little groups and talk about it. And we talk at each other about it, but we never talk with each other. I never make the effort to really get to know the perspective of someone different from me. And sometimes they don't make the effort to get to know the perspective that I grew up in and where I came from. And it causes mistrust and it causes divisiveness that is so unnecessary. And I think the one gift that we could give this community with this center is the process may wake us up to seeing the deep-rooted mistrust we have for each other, not because we're bad people, because the people I know in this community are great, wonderful people. We just come from different perspectives, and those different perspectives cause us to wonder why somebody thinks different than I do. And when we don't take the time to really get to know and empathize with the other fellow, the other woman, we lose something. And my fondest dream is that this center and this process will wake us up and make us have this conversation that is far too long overdue. And I hope, and my fondest dream is, that this center will teach my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren just what a terrible, horrible period this was. And that they walk out of there saying, never again, never, never again.
So I guess with that, we'll take a few questions and we'll Well, I'm favorable about it. I think Representative Richardson has spoken to members of the board. I know there are several members of the community who are willing to have their voices and their opinions heard. And the fact that you have major funding partners represented in this room today, I think makes it a little more credible. So I think that the chances are real good of that. But I'll let him speak to specifics of what the board said about it.
I've not spoken to the entire board, but I've spoken to 6 members of the board, and all 6 are very much in favor of this and want to make it happen. I wouldn't have printed the op-ed had I not spoken with those members, and these are the key players in the board, and gotten their blessing that they would do these things. And so I feel very, very confident that they will embrace this. Why wouldn't you? I mean, it's called communicating, and it's called advancing the ball further, and it's giving the mayor of this city his due respect, and joining in his leadership. Mayor Coben has given us a major golden opportunity here at great risk, and by golly, we need to get behind that and embrace it.
All the council members here?
Well, we have not taken official action with the new council, and I think that is something that is to come. So maybe individually you can speak to the council members, but as a board, we have not made an official stance with the new council.
What's the next step? Like, when will the city council have to vote on this?
Well, I'll need to, of course, discuss this with the council members who are here. They are recently sworn in, and we have a lot on our plate, and certainly this is at the top of the list. I think what's important is that we allow this process the opportunity to run its course, that we, within the next 10 days, speak to members of the community who are interested in being a part of this discussion, to get this citizen board task force established and allow them to do their work and to work this out. Look, they have a lot better insight than we do. As policymakers, we basically are responsible for making sure that all sides are represented, and we deal with policy and budget. I think that the real work will come from this task force, and they're visiting other communities and working this out. So I think that's the first step.
Mr. Mayor, do you have a timeline for all of this? How soon the group will be formed and do their work?
Within the next 10 days, hopefully we'll identify who that.
What about the outcome?
The outcome I can't really say, because I think it's important to allow them to do their work and to do it in a reasonable way. And as Representative Richardson and the General Assembly work through the budgetary process, the same thing on the City Council's side of that we'll have to talk about that portion, the points that we control. But I think it is important to make sure that this is a project that the community embraces, and I think that task force will have a critical role in it.
So would your vote be on the funding part of it, as far as what the city has already committed to, the $7 million somewhere in that area, and then also with the state representatives trying to get their part of the budget voted in so we can get that money?
Well, our participation, the city's participation, has always been about budget. It has been contributing that. We were not a part of, any of the programming and the other things. The resolution that you referenced from 2017 had some conditions, so I think the new council will have to, at some point, ratify that or make a decision about that, which we, have not established a timeline for when that will occur at this time.
This is the city's portion of this. Does this fail if county commissioners, we have 2 county commissioners here, if they don't back it, 3? We have 3, I'm sorry. I couldn't see the third person. Marshall. I should know. Does this fail if they don't get on board?
You'd have to speak to them about
Does
that.
this fail? Are you guys supportive of this? Do you mind them being a part of this? I know you called it.
I mean, certainly they're free to make whatever discussion to answer any questions
Marshall,
that they want.
you're the chairman of the board. Let Marshall Faircloth come up here. I'd like to see the county's position on this, because this has to be a team effort. If not, everything that Billy has talked about, everything you've talked about, I think falls apart. I think they're all getting up there.
I think the fact, yes, come on up, guys, if you want to do that. But we, as commissioners, voted several. It's been a couple of years ago now, but we actually voted that if all the conditions that we put upon our position were met, and the main ones were that the city is all in and the state is all in, then we would do our part. And there's been no action since then to rescind any of that. Now, will there be further discussion? You betcha. In the final analysis, I believe that a majority will support this center.
What's your number? How much from the county?
$7.5 million. That was our request.
I think your op-ed said that they're going to go to museums and look at different projects. Are they going to be part of the actual local board that's making decisions on what type of stories are told?
There's two different boards, there's a task force, and then within, is my understanding, and we're learning as we go, but it's my understanding that each regional museum has a local task force. Now, what Ms. Bryan explained to me was, and it makes a lot of sense, is most of that task force or that advisory board are comprised of historians, which makes sense because you want to get it right. At the same time, when I was at Carolina as a student, I was blessed to be student body president. The student body president is a voting member of the board of trustees. And I asked the chancellor why you did that. Why did they do that? And he said, well, it's vital that the board hear the perspective of the students. And not only that, the student that they hear from has to be empowered as a voting member of the board to have credibility. I learned so much from that board, and I hope that they learned a little bit from me. I think it's absolutely essential, and again, I commend our mayor on this because we've had lengthy discussions about it, and we all evolve as people, and we all evolve. You know, that's the beauty of our faith. That's the beauty of being human, is you evolve. And the more I saw, the more I realized that it is absolutely essential in as diverse a community as we have, that in addition to the historians being on that board, that there be people that represent the broad spectrum of this community to make certain that the real story of Cumberland County and this area be told during this period. And a lot of times historians know the big picture, but a lot of times average citizens have the anecdotal stories that I frankly think make the museum richer. You know, to hear that story and to put a name and a family to it, that's a real human being we're talking about here. We're not just talking about some man being lynched. We're talking about a neighbor, a friend, a father, a colleague, a fellow worker that was put up on a tree, hung, without due process of law, and that personalizes it. So I think that the board needs the protection, it needs the input of local citizens in addition to the historians. And I don't believe anybody has any problem with that concept. I hope they don't. It's the right thing to do. As Mark Twain says, it's never wrong to do the right thing.
How do you feel about the state funding? You think that's going to come through? I know that it's kind of been held up with this Medicaid discussion.
If I was able to predict what the General Assembly would do, I'd be a wealthy man right now. But I'm very optimistic that it will come about.
I mean, it probably wouldn't come about if the local folks didn't agree to this. Would it be fair to say there'd be some hesitation for the state to pass that?
Why have a center that's purportedly here to tell the story of this era and of this region that doesn't have the full input of everyone?
Wilmington would take this if we turn it down. Have you heard that?
I can't really speak for if there's been a decision by the local body. I have had several discussions with the mayor, Mayor Sappho's down there, yes, and he was not aware that was the case. So we don't know.
You're not gonna have the chance. We're gonna get it right.
Yeah. So we'll take one or two more questions, and then I think that will do it. All right. Thank you.